Why do you say that a part of you always blames yourself? That question not only touches a person, but opens a deep crack in their memory. A strictly controlled childhood, heavy expectations, and a journey of growing up under invisible pressure have silently shaped every choice later in life. From fateful auditions, relationships that began as work and became friendships, to bitter lessons that only cinema can fully reveal. This is not a story with a light or easy beginning. This is a moment that brought Hollywood to a standstill, when a single unexpected event shook the faith of film lovers worldwide. Not a familiar upward trajectory, but a direct collision, where career, emotions, and destiny intersect in a heavy silence. If you want to understand what really happened behind the scenes, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications to join us in exploring profound and never-before-told stories. The sudden and heartbreaking news of Rob Reiner not only shocked his fans, but also left a profound impact on the elite, those who had lived, breathed, and thrived in the industry for decades. The pain was especially heavy when considering his children. "I miss Rob," a voice said, its tone lowered. "We worked together on the film Ghost of Mississippi. We did a few other projects too. In the van, he would often come up with a game. One person would name an actor, the next had to name a film that actor had been in, and then the next person would talk about the director of that film." It was a seemingly simple game, but it perfectly reflected Rob Reiner. He was a true master, possessing a deep understanding of filmmaking and everything surrounding it. He was quick-witted, charming, and had a sense of humor that always made the film crew laugh. What people remember most about Rob when he was a director was his pure joy. He loved every step of the filmmaking process, captivated by it like a child lost in a candy store. Almost no one ever saw him irritable or grumpy. They had nearly completed a fantastic project together, one that everyone hoped would come to fruition. And then another voice, usually calm, discreet, and always controlled, finally couldn't remain silent any longer. It was Ron Howard. Ron Howard had witnessed Hollywood in both its glory and its darkest. For years, he had skillfully navigated the industry without being caught up in the public frenzy, but this moment clearly touched something very personal. Rob Reiner's passing forced Ron to confront truths about Hollywood that many insiders often avoid. For decades, Ron Howard projected an image of stability, a steadfast professional, a reliable director, with a familiar, reassuring smile. While those around him faced setbacks or public controversies, Ron seemed to remain detached, almost protected. But that outward appearance never told the whole story. After Rob Reiner's death, Ron finally lifted the veil slightly, revealing deeper reflections about respect within the industry, about the legacy left behind, and about tensions never before reported in the press, but always simmering beneath the surface. This event forced him to re-examine relationships with more layers of meaning than the public ever knew. What surprised many most was Ron's heavy tone when mentioning Rob. This was not just a personal loss, it's also history, the years of shared existence in a creative space, the silent competition and mutual understanding between two great figures, people who rarely speak their minds directly. Ronald William Howard's life seems to have never been separate from the camera lens. Born into a family with actor Rance Howard and actress Jean Spiegel Howard, he entered the entertainment world at a very young age. On the outside, it's a magical world, but inside, it's tightly organized, strictly disciplined, and uncompromising. Creativity always goes hand in hand with pressure, and Ron's childhood was intertwined with responsibility from a very young age. Before many other children could even speak their full sentences, Ron had already started working. A long journey that led him to where he is today. At just 18 months old, the boy appeared in the film Frontier Woman, inadvertently stepping onto a path he would almost never fully leave. Acting wasn't a fleeting phase in Ron's life. It gradually became his living environment, the world he grew up in, so familiar that it was difficult to distinguish between work and life. "When I was little, I was very tightly controlled," Ron once admitted, speaking about his self-reproach. His parents were always worried about the risks outside, from kidnapping to other dangers of fame. That protection, though stemming from love, made Ron feel stifled and dissatisfied. Then Clint appeared, an extroverted, sociable, easygoing boy. Ron saw in him everything he longed for: freedom, a rich social life, natural relationships with peers. That's why Ron urged his parents to give Clint more space and flexibility. Even when Clint started experimenting with marijuana and similar substances, Ron remained completely detached from drugs, choosing a different path. When the Howard family moved to California in the late 1950s to pursue television opportunities, the normal rhythms of childhood quickly disappeared. Storybooks were replaced by scripts. Auditions interrupted family dinners. While other children played outdoors, Ron memorized his lines. His father was juggling acting roles and other responsibilities, and Ron, still with his baby teeth, had to balance schoolwork with a demanding studio schedule. There were no leisurely afternoons, no genuine carefree moments, only expectations that grew larger with each passing year. Later, Ron described that period as living in a golden cage, safe on the outside, but isolated on the inside. He was well protected, yet isolated from the world of children. Surrounded by adults, peer relationships were distant. Then everything changed almost overnight. When The Andy Griffith Show premiered, 6-year-old Ron played Opie Taylor. America immediately embraced him, transforming his image into an icon of innocence, warmth, and approachability. But behind the scenes, reality was quite different. While audiences enjoyed the simplicity on screen, Ron sat in cramped studios completing his homework, listening to laughter echoing from the set while waiting for his turn in front of the camera. These experiences silently shaped him later in life, including how he reacted to losses like Rob Reiner's story. Ron's father was not only present but also always stood by his son. He questioned the script, openly discussed matters with the director, and worked alongside the actors in every scene. There's one unchanging principle: don't act to please, don't act cute, but act with authenticity. That teaching not only influenced Ron's acting, but also became the foundation of his creative thinking. However, even that protection couldn't erase the deep-seated emotional burdens. Becoming a public figure always comes with a price. Ron belongs to the audience, to the studios, to the relentless expectations, but very rarely truly belongs to himself. That pressure doesn't dissipate over time. It quietly accumulates year after year, leaving its mark on him. Decades later, Ron finally publicly admitted that those early years left scars that would never truly disappear. Those silent struggles followed him into adulthood, infiltrating his relationships, family life, and how he viewed people facing fame, especially people like Rob Reiner. Ron spoke of Rob as a successful New York director, producer, and screenwriter who could be filming in Central Park and still be stopped by passers-by shouting familiar taunts from a past role. He recounted this not to mock, but to illustrate just how persistent fame can be, no matter how far one has progressed in their career. When Ron entered his teenage years, all the public saw was success after success. But what they didn't see was the exhaustion that success brought. When The Andy Griffith Show ended, Ron was only 14 years old. Yet emotionally, he was far more mature than his age. 8 seasons living in a fictional world had deeply imprinted themselves on him. Ron was surrounded by caring and protective adults but missed the chaos, the clumsy mistakes, and the sense of freedom that most teenagers experience as they explore themselves. While others learned to stumble, Ron learned discipline and self-control. Even his school life was anything but normal. Ron's school life was divided between real classes at Burbank and hurried tutoring sessions on set. He solved math problems while crew members pushed equipment across his desk. Lunch wasn't with classmates, but with Andy Griffith, Don Knotts, and people twice his age. These small details exposed the true price of early fame. There was a moment that haunted Ron for years. During the filming of The Music Man, when he was just 8 years old, he was overwhelmed by a dance routine he feared he couldn't do. In a silent panic, Ron leaned to Shirley Jones and confessed, "I can't do it." Instead of pushing him, she comforted him. The film crew adjusted the camera angle, only filming from the knees up to hide his awkward steps. The audience praised the performance, unaware of the immense fear hidden behind that smile. That fear didn't disappear. It grew, teaching Ron how to project confidence even when he was completely insecure inside. It was a crucial survival skill in Hollywood, especially when working alongside strong, boisterous, and overwhelming personalities. People like Rob Reiner, whose passion and opinions often filled an entire room. Then, happy days came along. At 19, Ron walked into Gary Marshall's office, unaware that he was about to repeat history. Richie Cunningham quickly became a beloved American figure, neat, trustworthy, safe. Audiences loved him, but inwardly Ron felt increasingly pressured. By age 23, the burden could no longer be ignored. He was still playing a teenager, while the world outside had drastically changed. Images of the Vietnam War flooded the media. Culture was shifting rapidly. Young people were questioning everything. Yet Richie Cunningham remained in a closed world, almost untouched by reality. Ron tried to change that. He even wrote a memorandum, requesting only a single storyline that addressed the war, a moment that breathed real life. The answer he received was a cold refusal. That refusal didn't erupt into conflict. It smoldered, silently. Ron began to feel frozen in a character who was never allowed to grow up. Trapped in an endless, drawn-out adolescence, while the world continued to move forward without waiting for him, Ron found himself in a suffocating, stagnant state that led him to a profound realization, and realization that would change the entire path ahead of him. If Ron wants to reclaim his identity, if he wants to take control of his own life story, then continuing to stand in front of the camera is no longer an option. He has to step back. For Ron, directing is not just a career step, it's survival. It's an escape, a path back to himself after years of being shaped by characters who never truly belonged to him. It is this long and complex journey that has given Ron a rare ability to understand other creators, people who only truly find their voice behind the camera, especially people like Rob Reiner, even though their personalities and working methods are almost opposite. In his personal life, Ron carries values shaped by his family. Cheryl's advice to Bryce, to put marriage above children, is no coincidence. It's a philosophy Ron has absorbed from his parents. Although both Clinton and Ron had dynamic careers, their parents always kept their marriage at the center of everything. They had each other, shared dreams, and their children were merely a continuation of that foundation. That perspective stayed with Ron throughout his life, influencing how he built relationships and perceived stability amidst the pressures of fame. Ron's real opportunity to escape this feeling of confinement finally arrived when Roger Corman made him an offer that was both tempting and risky. The deal was simple. Star in Eat My Dust, in exchange for Ron being allowed to direct his own project. He didn't accept for fame or status. He accepted for freedom. That opportunity quickly culminated in Grand Theft Auto, a wild and chaotic car comedy co-written by Ron and his father, Rance Howard. The budget was so meager it was almost absurd, but they made the most of every penny. The cameras rolled, dozens of cars were destroyed on screen, and despite all predictions, the film grossed millions of dollars. For the first time in his life, Ron felt truly in control, creative power, decision-making power, something acting had never fully given him. But in Hollywood, control always comes with a price. Ron became intensely focused. Every detail mattered. Every frame had to have a reason to exist. That focus was honed through Night Shift, Splash, then Cocoon, Willow, and Parenthood. Each success not only boosted his reputation, but also raised expectations. Studios didn't just trust Ron, they relied on him. That trust gradually turned into relentless pressure, a weight that was never truly lifted. By the early 1990s, Ron was no longer the boy audiences had grown up with. He had become a creative force, expected to deliver perfect results in every situation. That pressure also gave Ron a deep understanding of what directors like Rob Reiner face every day. Both pursue authenticity, excellence, and genuine emotion, only differing in how they achieve it. And then, the greatest challenge appeared, opening the most demanding chapter in Ron's career, Apollo 13 Ho. From day one, Ron rejected all shortcuts. He wanted every detail to be authentic, dignified, and absolutely precise. The film crew shot hundreds of scenes in a zero-gravity environment on a special NASA aircraft, each lasting only a few dozen seconds, repeating them to the point of exhaustion. The mission control room was recreated piece by piece using real NASA equipment, purchased at a symbolic price. Every switch, every signal light, every radio call had to be historically accurate. Ron pushed himself beyond his limits. He worked almost non-stop for months on end, day after day, night after night, in a state of constant stress. Sleep became fragmented, coming and going like shards. Rest was no longer considered a necessity. Until one morning, his body finally spoke up. Ron collapsed on set. Severely dehydrated with dangerously high blood pressure, he was completely exhausted. Production had to be halted. When Ron returned, trembling but with unwavering focus, the film crew stunned him. They wore simple shirts bearing the words, "Mission Control Center." Words were needed. The message was clear. They would be there for him, whatever happened. But behind that calm exterior, Ron understood an undeniable truth. He had crossed a line he could no longer ignore. The pursuit of perfection had nearly overwhelmed him, and more frighteningly, it could have swept away those closest to him. That moment haunted Ron, forcing him to re-examine the fragile relationship between ambition, work, and personal life. It also changed how he viewed other directors, especially those like Rob Reiner, who carried immense pressure behind the public spotlight. Therefore, the shocking news of Rob Reiner's death, along with the worrying circumstances surrounding it, affected Ron more deeply than anyone could have imagined. It rekindled the anxieties he had never truly let go of. Despite achieving so much in his career, there was one year that weighed more heavily than all the others, 1991. It should have been a time of complete joy. Instead, it marked the beginning of a pain that would last for decades. At that time, everything seemed to be at its peak. His daughter Jocelyn had just been born. Ron's career was flourishing. He finally had the creative freedom that most directors only dared to dream of. Then a decision came, a decision he would later admit was one of the most painful choices of his life. A 6-month overseas filming project was scheduled in distant Ireland. Ron made the phone call and said goodbye. For those 6 months, Cheryl shouldered everything alone. She cared for the young children, juggling exhaustion and responsibility, while Ron lived on the other side of the world. His life was consumed by long filming days, endless script revisions, unpredictable locations, and relentless pressure from the studio. Success continued, but the price, Ron only fully understood much later. When Ron finally returned home, reality struck him harder than any criticism he had ever received in his career. Jocelyn didn't recognize her father. Bryce was barely reactive, and Cheryl carried a quiet weariness on her shoulders, an exhaustion beyond words. Years later, Ron admitted that the moment had shattered something deep within him. By 2025, he stated frankly that from that moment on, success felt empty. What was the point of building great things if the price was the very people you claimed you were doing everything for? Ron promised himself he would never disappear like that again. But life, in its familiar way, always finds a way to pull people back into old habits. In 2005, while reshooting scenes for Cinderella Man, Ron fell into that familiar cycle again. Endless nights, a never-ending stream of decisions, missed birthdays, memories slipping away without a chance to hold on. When he returned home once more, the house felt completely different. The children had grown. Cheryl was still there, shouldering everything alone, steadfast and silent, just as before. That second moment forced Ron to confront something even deeper, a belief sown in his childhood. The idea that he always had to say yes, always had to do better than expected, always had to prove himself worthy of the opportunities given. It took Ron decades to name that truth. In 2025, on their 50th wedding anniversary, Ron donated a bench to John Burrow High School, where he first met Cheryl. Standing there, reflecting on his life, he admitted something that stunned even him. He said he would readily give up any awards, any blockbuster films, any moment of celebration, if it could buy back the weeks and months he had lost with his children. That profound personal price, the silent sacrifices behind success, is why the news of Rob Reiner impacted Ron so strongly. Reiner lived a vibrant public life, driven by purpose, work, and belief. But there was always a struggle that no talent or influence could control or rewrite. While Ron often spoke of his wife and children with tenderness and gratitude, there was another connection that had shaped him long before Hollywood did: his younger brother, Clint Howard. To the public, Clint was an unforgettable supporting actor, appearing everywhere from Star Trek to Apollo 13. But to Ron, Clint held a much deeper meaning. Clint was the only one who truly understood what it felt like growing up in a system that never stopped to ask how you were feeling. As long as the cameras were rolling, everything went on. The two brothers grew up side by side on adjacent film sets, brushing past each other in the tangled corridors of cables, amidst the shouts of the crew and the stifling heat of the lights, coexisting in a world that never slowed down to allow them to be normal children. From the very beginning, their bond was never merely that of brothers. Ron and Clint were two men who witnessed and endured an extraordinary childhood, a childhood few outsiders could truly understand. This quiet understanding became one of the few anchors that helped Ron stay grounded when everything around him constantly threatened to pull him away from himself. Both earned money at a young age, too young to understand the true meaning of money. They stepped onto the stage and into the cameras long before they had time to question who they were in an industry that demanded perfection and a cruelly early emotional maturity. In that strange world, Clint became living proof that Ron was not alone. They were not just brothers. They were colleagues, witnesses, and survivors of a childhood where the spotlight concealed more than it illuminated. Every long, winding corridor, every blinding light, every pause between shots, all were moments they had shared together. But as they grew older, Life didn't treat Clint with the same gentleness as it had treated Ron. While Ron's directing career steadily progressed, Clint's path in the 1980s became increasingly precarious and unstable. Clint began struggling intensely with substance abuse, spiraling into a dangerous spiral that brought him ever closer to collapse. Ron witnessed it all, helpless, horrified, and desperate. By 1990, Ron was forced to make the hardest decision of his life, to draw a line he never wanted to draw. Either seek help, or the relationship would end. That moment changed everything. Clint chose recovery. He entered treatment and, little by little, painfully, rebuilt himself. Years later, in 2021, the two brothers look back on that chapter of their lives with rare openness, sharing their story with honesty and love. In their memoir, The Boys, they acknowledged that transparency and family bonding had saved Clint's life. But time brought a new fear, a fear Ron couldn't control, nor could he alleviate with reason. Clint was facing a serious health problem. Ron described it only as debilitating and life-changing. The details were kept secret, but his voice spoke volumes. This wasn't a small matter. This was the kind of diagnosis that could completely disrupt the rhythm of an entire family. Days dragged on in the waiting rooms. Long nights stretched on in silent anxiety. For someone who had dedicated his career to problem-solving, to controlling the structure and shaping the ending, this helplessness was the most devastating thing. Ron admitted something rare. He felt utterly powerless. He couldn't intervene, couldn't fix things. He couldn't adjust the script, couldn't rearrange the setting, and couldn't protect his brother, the one who had once been his shield against the isolation of fame. For the first time in many years, Ron said he was truly afraid. Not afraid of criticism, not afraid of failure, but afraid of losing the only person who had stood by him through every chapter of his life. This direct confrontation with his vulnerability stripped away the emotional shell he had painstakingly built over decades. And it laid the emotional foundation for his profound reaction to the news about Rob Reiner. As Clint's condition worsened, Ron was forced to confront a truth he had avoided for years. A truth long hidden beneath a veneer of professionalism, composure, and quiet strength. The man who had spent nearly half a century telling stories that touched the hearts of millions finally had to confront his own fragility. In a recent interview, Ron admitted that Clint's health issues had shaken him more deeply than any career setback. Not the regrets of EDTV, not the harsh pressures of Solo, nor the immense burden of Apollo 13. Nothing compared to the fear of losing Clint. Ron spoke of sleepless nights when childhood memories flooded back. The small classroom in Desilu, the whispered conversations between scenes, and Clint's presence making the harsh studio lights feel warmer, less lonely. Those memories, once a spiritual refuge, now carried an unnameable, agonizing weight. Ron also frankly admitted to feeling a deep sense of guilt. Guilt because while his directing career was flourishing, Clint was quietly battling his inner struggles alone. Guilt for missing the warning signs. Guilt for not being able to protect his brother sooner. That overwhelming moment forced Ron to look back at his entire life. He began to significantly reduce his involvement in long, exhausting projects. He allowed himself to slow down in ways he had never dared to imagine before. Because when all illusions of control faded, the awakening came more powerfully than any spotlight. Ron quietly learned to say no to projects that required him to be away from home for extended periods. Endless business trips were no longer worth the trade-off. Even Imagine Entertainment, the company he co-founded in 1985, now operated more independently, giving Ron space to be closer to the most important things in his life: his family. His life was no longer dominated by filming schedules or studio deadlines. Instead, his time revolved around shared meals, late-night conversations, and the little moments he didn't want to miss again. In one of his most poignant confessions, Ron spoke of something he had avoided for years. The silence between projects, the slowing pace of work, had forced him to confront a difficult truth. He realized that he had spent his life telling the world's story, shaping the destinies of others, but somewhere along the way, he had stopped listening to and telling his own story. Now, at 71, with an estimated net worth of hundreds of millions of dollars and a stellar career, Ron had finally learned a bitter lesson. Achievements gradually lose their luster when the people you love most seem to drift away. For fans, the shock wasn't about how much hardship Ron Howard had overcome, but about the silent price he had to pay to achieve it all. The most heartbreaking thing is that he endured it all in silence for a long time, quietly, calmly, and with dignity, never once seeking pity. And now, when he finally speaks, the weight of all that has been suppressed for so long becomes undeniable. Some wounds never truly heal, even for someone considered an icon of resilience and respect in Hollywood. And it is at this point that the story takes a different turn. Because while Ron was still struggling with his deep personal pain, another loss unexpectedly struck, spreading like a shockwave across the entire industry, forcing him to confront collective grief. The news of Rob Reiner came as a devastating blow. Ron was already under immense mental pressure from his battle with his younger brother Clint's serious illness, living each day in constant fear, guilt, and anxiety. Then suddenly, headlines started appearing in rapid succession. Rob Reiner's life ended abruptly and tragically at the age of 78. His wife, Michelle Singer, 68, also passed away. Both died in a violent incident at their Brentwood home. For Ron, known for his composure and ability to control his emotions in public, this devastating reality was utterly shocking. He had always said he respected Rob for his abundant creativity, sharp sense of humor, and unwavering passion. They were two almost opposite personalities. Ron was quiet, cautious, and methodical. Rob was bold, outspoken, and unafraid of confrontation. Yet they shared a bond that few could understand. Both grew up in the harsh, high-pressure environment of Hollywood. Both rose to the pinnacle of directing by overcoming intense boardroom battles, bitter creative compromises, and relentless expectations. Ron once shared a philosophy he often told young actors, that many people audition, and whether or not you get chosen doesn't really reflect anything. Everything is in the director's mind, and whether you get the role or not doesn't define your value. He always advised them not to try at all costs to get a role. He encouraged them to enjoy the moment of acting, to express themselves. You might only get to act in one scene, but do it completely, because if you only focus on getting chosen, the experience will be empty. Ron recalled an old story about Michael Caine, an actor he greatly admired. Years ago, when $1 million was the highest salary an actor could receive, Michael Caine said he was paid that much just to sit around. Acting, he did it for free. His meaning was clear. Acting was his passion, his reason for existence. Jack Nicholson said something similar. That was the spirit Ron and Rob both cherished. Then heartbreaking details gradually emerged. Reports confirmed that both Rob and Michelle suffered serious trauma in the incident. Their daughter, Roy, was the one who discovered the truth. This was not a peaceful ending, not a quiet farewell. It came unexpectedly, chaotically, and hauntingly. For Ron, who was already overwhelmed by events beyond his control, this shock deepened his pain and fear. Those close to him later shared that he had fallen into a state of shock, not only because of the loss of a colleague, but also because of the cruelty and horrific tragedy of what had happened. A close source, speaking on condition of anonymity, recounted that Ron kept repeating the same question, as if he couldn't find any other anchor. How could something like this happen to Rob, to Michelle? And in that moment, the man who had spent his life creating satisfying endings on screen was forced to confront an inexplicable reality. This news shattered the fragile sense of security Ron still believed the world held, breaking the order he thought existed. The industry's reaction to Rob Reiner's passing was immediate, powerful, and emotional. This clearly reflected the profound influence his works and voice had on so many generations. But for Ron, this wasn't just public grief. It was deeply personal. It touched directly on his private struggle with loss, fear, and the feeling that time was silently slipping away beyond his control. Ron always respected Rob's boldness. Rob never shied away from political or social debates. He spoke frankly, loudly, and without regret. Ron was different. He chose a quieter path, believing his role wasn't to dictate what others should think, but to help them see themselves for who they truly were. But in this moment, those differences were meaningless. The pain had erased all distance. Already burdened by the missed time with his family, Ron was reportedly haunted by Rob and Michelle's final moments together. Those thoughts lingered, especially when he rewatched Rob's last public interview, a conversation that moved many. In it, Rob spoke softly about family, love, the stories we pass on, and the legacy we leave behind. The contrast was painful. Rob spoke of life's finiteness with serenity and acceptance. No one could have imagined that his life would end so abruptly and harshly. In a rare and measured public statement, Ron finally spoke. There was no fanfare, no dramatic rhetoric, just pain expressed in silence. He spoke not just of Rob as a director, an actor, or a social voice. He spoke of Rob as a person, a man, like himself, who had dedicated his life to storytelling and to his family. Ron acknowledged Rob's immense influence, not only on cinema but also on culture and social dialogue. Even when they didn't always agree, their respect for each other never faded. Ron's voice lowered as he reflected on the meaning of all this. He said that this kind of loss forces one to reconsider everything. It makes you appreciate the people you love even more deeply. He spoke of Rob and Michelle with affection, as two people who lived their lives to the fullest for each other and for the desire to make a difference. He said that their sudden death was not just a family's private grief, but a grief felt by the entire community. His heart goes out to their children, especially Roy, who had to face something no one else should have to endure. Continuing his reflections, Ron spoke about the shared path that many people in Hollywood have walked together. There are those who grew up together in this industry, starting at a very young age and learning to mature earlier than usual. Over time, they became witnesses to each other's lives, to the ups and downs, the quiet moments that no one outside saw. And when such a devastating event occurs, it forces everyone to stop, to confront the pain instead of avoiding it. It serves as a reminder of how fragile life is, that control is sometimes an illusion, and that no success or preparation can protect anyone from unexpected loss. For Ron Howard, who had lived for years in constant fear of losing his brother, Rob Reiner's death became a harsh and utterly unwelcome reminder. A reminder that life doesn't always offer perfect endings. A reminder that even the most carefully constructed worlds can crumble in an instant. And more than anything, that truth struck Ron directly, shaking him from the depths of his being. Suddenly, everything Ron Howard had shared recently took on a different meaning. The decision to slow down, the choice of family, leaving the endless cycle of work, all now connected in a painfully clear way. For the first time, he publicly acknowledged a truth that left many speechless. He had spent his life telling stories to the world, shaping the stories of millions. But at some point, he stopped telling his own story. That truth became even clearer after what happened to Rob Reiner. Rob lived his life vibrant, passionate, open, and fearless. And the sudden, brutal end of his life became a harsh wake-up call about the fragility of each passing day. No success, influence, or preparation is enough to protect anyone from such unexpected changes. Everything can change direction in the blink of an eye. For Ron, this was not just the loss of a colleague. It was a wake-up call he didn't expect, but couldn't ignore either. A painful lesson that time is never guaranteed, and precious moments wait for no one. The story of Rob Reiner and his wife, Michelle, didn't just shake Hollywood. It transcended the boundaries of the entertainment industry and touched upon something far more universal. It reminds us all that life is fragile, unpredictable, and sometimes incredibly unfair. Ron has witnessed victory. He has witnessed defeat. He has traversed the glorious highs and the harsh lows of his career. But this moment forces him to confront a truth deeper than all others, that even legends have no more time. It is this realization that makes his recent confession so poignantly real. He is no longer pursuing legacy. He is preserving moments. He chooses presence over acclaim. And this shift doesn't come from peace. It is born from loss. What makes this story so heavy is the sheer number of conflicting emotions. Ron confronts the fear of losing his brother, the burden of past regrets, and then witnesses a sudden, chaotic, and meaningless ending. It's the kind of moment that forces one to pause and question who truly matters, what truly matters, and what, once lost, can never be replaced. This isn't just a Hollywood story. This is a human story. And that's why so many people feel it so deeply. Not because of fame, but because of the truth. Now the question is for you. Which part of this story resonates with you the most? Is it Ron's honesty about his lost time? Is it the shocking ending to Rob Reiner's life? Or is it the reminder that even those who seem to have it all still carry indelible regrets? Share your thoughts in the comments below. This is a space for genuine conversations. And if this story makes you pause, reflect, or see life differently, don't forget to like it. That small action helps stories like this reach more people. Please share this video with anyone who might need a reminder to slow down and appreciate loved ones while you still can. And if you want to continue exploring the depths of celebrity life, the hidden struggles and the stories behind the glitz and glamour, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos. Right now, another video is waiting for you on your screen. More drama, more untold moments, and heartwarming stories you definitely don't want to miss. Click on it, stay tuned, and see you in the next video.